She walked through the crowded hallways, her backpack hanging loosely on one shoulder. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. The chatter of students, the slamming of lockers, and the laughter echoing from classrooms felt louder when she was nearby. She kept her head down as much as she could, trying not to attract attention, but it never seemed to work. Somehow, the bullies always noticed her. She was smaller than many of her classmates, with eyes that seemed to take in everything quietly. Most people barely noticed her. She didn't raise her hand often in class, didn't sit with large groups at lunch, and avoided the noisy cliques. She liked to draw in her notebook during breaks, sketching scenes from her imagination. Art had always been her escape, the one place she felt completely herself. But even that small comfort wasn't always safe. It started with small things. A pencil missing from her desk, a notebook torn up and tossed across the hallway, notes left on her desk with cruel messages written in messy handwriting. At first she tried to ignore it, telling herself it wasn't worth the fight, but it kept happening. Every day, every week. The bullies had a way of making her feel like she was constantly walking on eggshells. She remembered one day in particular. It was Monday and the hallway smelled of floor cleaner and cafeteria food. She had stayed late in art class finishing a sketch she had been working on for weeks. She loved how the colors blended together, how the shapes seemed to tell a story. But as she turned the corner toward her locker, she saw them. The group of students who had made her life miserable. They leaned against the lockers, laughing in a way that immediately made her stomach twist. "Hey, look who it is!" One of them sneered. Little Miss Fancy Notebook. Her heart beat faster. She tried to walk past them quickly, hoping they would lose interest. But the lead bully, a boy who always seemed to have a cruel smirk, stepped in front of her. "Going somewhere? Or just hiding in your little art world?" She swallowed hard, looking down at her shoes. "Just going to my next class," she said softly. "Uh-huh," he said, and the others laughed. They reached out to grab her backpack, but she pulled it back just in time. She could feel their eyes on her, heavy and sharp, as if they were waiting for her to make a mistake. She knew one wrong move and they would pounce. She managed to slip past them, her hands trembling slightly as she held her notebook tightly against her chest. The sound of laughter followed her down the hall, echoing in her ears long after she had turned the corner. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reminded herself that she was strong. She had survived every other day. She could survive this one too. But the fear never completely went away. Even in class, when the teacher's back was turned, she could feel someone staring at her. Small gestures would make her flinch. A pencil tapping too loudly on a desk, a whisper from across the room, a glance that lingered too long. She learned to read the subtle signs, to notice when trouble was coming. It was exhausting, but she had no choice. At lunch, she sat alone at a corner table in the cafeteria, her tray of food untouched for a few minutes as she sketched quietly. The noise around her faded into the background. She drew people she had seen earlier that day, capturing their expressions, their gestures. It made her feel calmer, like she had a small shield against the chaos of the school. But even in these moments of peace, the bullies found ways to intrude. Sometimes they would walk past her table, pretending to look for a seat, but making sure she knew they were watching. Sometimes they would knock over her tray or spill her drink accidentally, laughing when she jumped back. Every day was a test of patience and courage. She had a few friends, classmates who understood her quiet nature. They would sit together in the library or meet at the park after school. They shared stories, jokes, and small victories. But during the day in the halls and classrooms, she was mostly on her own. She had learned to rely on her instincts, to pay attention to the smallest details, and to keep her composure even when she felt like breaking down. One afternoon, as she left her classroom, she noticed the bullies lurking near the bathrooms. She had seen them there before, sometimes waiting for someone to slip or lose their courage. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The hall felt narrower suddenly, as if the walls were closing in on her. She tried to think of a way to avoid them, to take a different route, but it was too late. They stepped in front of her, blocking the path. The smirk on the leader's face made her stomach twist. "Going somewhere?" he asked again, his tone heavy with mockery. She tried to speak, but her throat felt tight. She forced herself to keep calm. "I just need to go to the bathroom," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Oh, the bathroom, huh?" he said, stepping closer. "We'll go with you." Her heart raced. She knew she couldn't push past them. Not safely. The other students passing by didn't seem to notice anything wrong. Or maybe they were too busy with their own worlds. She felt trapped, like the walls of the school were closing in. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that fear was only temporary. She had faced worse situations before. She had found ways to survive every challenge, to protect herself without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her scared. She had learned that courage didn't always mean fighting back physically. It often meant staying calm, thinking clearly and waiting for the right moment. As they approached the bathroom, she noticed a small detail: a janitor's cart parked nearby, the janitor busy mopping another hallway. Maybe there was a chance for help. She kept that in mind even as her stomach twisted with anxiety. Once inside, the bullies cornered her near the sinks. The door was closed and the sound of water running from the taps echoed in the small space. They laughed, leaning against the walls, confident that they had her trapped. She felt a surge of fear, but also a strange determination. She wasn't going to let them see her break. Not today, her mind raced. She thought about her options, the smallest details she could use to her advantage. Maybe a sudden movement, a loud sound, or even just standing her ground with confidence. The bullies expected her to cower, but she had learned that fear could be controlled, channeled, and sometimes used to create opportunities. One of the bullies reached for her backpack again and she pulled it back sharply. "Careful," she said, her voice firm. "You don't want to make this worse for yourselves." They laughed, thinking it was a joke. But she didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on them, watching for the slightest sign of hesitation or distraction. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, but she focused on breathing steadily, on keeping her mind clear. At that moment, a loud bang came from the stall door, and one of the bullies jumped back in surprise. She saw the janitor's cart just outside the bathroom and realized he had accidentally dropped a mop handle. It was a small distraction, but enough to give her a tiny opening. She clenched her fists, ready to act if necessary, but also praying that she wouldn't have to fight physically. The bullies muttered curses under their breath, clearly irritated by the interruption. She used the moment to step slightly to the side, creating just enough space to move closer to the door. Every step felt like walking on a tightrope, every sound magnified. She didn't look away, didn't show fear, and kept her mind sharp, calculating the next move. The bell rang suddenly, echoing through the halls. One of the bullies cursed again and glanced toward the door, realizing time was running out. They didn't have much longer before someone else might hear the commotion. She took a deep breath, ready for whatever came next. This was just the beginning. She knew the bullies wouldn't give up so easily, and every day at school would continue to be a challenge. But she also knew something else. She had survived until now, and she could survive what was coming next. She stood tall, even if her hands shook slightly. She had faced fear before, and though it never went away completely, she was learning to use it. She was learning to turn it into something that could protect her, guide her, and help her find a way out of even the most frightening situations. The bathroom door opened just a little, letting a sliver of light fall across the floor. She took a careful step forward, keeping her eyes on the bullies, her mind focused and her heart steady. Today, she told herself, she would not let them win. She didn't know what would happen next, but she felt a small spark of hope. Somehow she would get through this. Somehow she would find a way to survive and maybe even come out stronger. And that thought, small but persistent, gave her just enough courage to keep moving forward. The bathroom smelled faintly of bleach and soap, the echo of dripping water filling the small space. She stood near the door, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack tightly, trying to steady herself. The bullies were close, leaning against the sinks and walls, their faces twisted with smirks and sneers. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating like a storm about to break. "Look at you, shaking like a leaf," one of them taunted, stepping closer. The leader's eyes gleamed with amusement, as if he was enjoying the fear he thought he saw. She didn't respond. She had learned long ago that showing fear only gave them power. Instead, she forced herself to breathe slowly, keeping her body still. Her mind sharp. She glanced around the bathroom quickly. The stalls were closed, and the mirrors reflected back distorted images of the small group. Her eyes caught a small detail she hadn't noticed before: a fire alarm pole near the corner. It wasn't far from her, maybe a few steps away. A thought flashed in her mind. Just a small action could create enough distraction to shift the balance. But it was risky. If she failed, things could get worse. One of the bullies reached for her backpack again, this time with more force. She stepped back instinctively, bumping lightly against the wall. "Don't," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just leave me alone." "Or what?" the leader said, his tone mocking. "What are you going to do, little girl?" Her heart pounded. She knew she couldn't match them physically, not against a group, but she had learned that courage sometimes came in small, clever ways. She could create a moment that would force them to pause even just for a second. That second might be all she needed. She moved slightly to the side, pretending to fumble with her backpack. Her fingers brushed against the wall near the fire alarm. She held her breath, hoping the movement wouldn't draw too much attention. The bullies leaned in, laughing, clearly underestimating her. That was their mistake. Suddenly, the door to the bathroom swung open a crack. A janitor, pushing a mop bucket down the hall, paused and glanced inside. The light from the hallway spilled in, making the shadows in the bathroom shift. The bullies' smirks faltered for a moment. One of them muttered something under his breath and took a step back, clearly irritated by the interruption. She used that moment. With a quick motion, she reached for the fire alarm pull. She didn't fully activate it, just enough to make a loud click and draw attention. The sound was sharp in the small room, and the bullies flinched. Their eyes darted toward the door, and the tension in their posture wavered. "Hey, what was that?" one of them said nervously. The leader frowned, looking irritated and confused. "Just a noise," she said quietly, almost as if she was talking to herself, but it gave her enough time to take a careful step toward the door. Every move was deliberate, measured. She couldn't afford to panic. Panic would make her a target again. One of the bullies lunged slightly, but she sidestepped, keeping calm. She could hear the faint sound of other students passing by the hall, unaware of what was happening inside. She realized that someone else could walk in at any moment and turn the tide in her favor. She just had to hold on until then. Her mind raced. She remembered the advice her older cousin had once given her. When people try to corner you, sometimes the smallest act of courage can change everything. It didn't have to be dramatic. It didn't have to be physical. Sometimes it was about holding your ground, showing them that you wouldn't be broken. She squared her shoulders. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, louder this time. The words were steady, calm. The bullies froze for a second, clearly taken aback. They weren't used to her standing up in this way. Most of the time she had kept silent, small, invisible. This was different. The leader narrowed his eyes. "You think that changes anything?" he said, stepping closer. Before she could respond, there was a sudden knock at the bathroom door. Another voice followed, a teacher she recognized from the hallway. "Is everything okay in there?" the teacher asked, concern clear in her tone. The bullies exchanged uneasy glances. Their confident smirks faltered. The smallest interruption was enough to make them hesitate, enough to break their rhythm of intimidation. She felt a surge of relief. The tension didn't vanish, but it shifted, giving her the upper hand in a situation that had felt completely hopeless just moments before. The teacher pushed the door open and stepped inside. Her eyes took in the scene immediately. "What's going on here?" she asked firmly. Her voice carried authority, calm but unyielding. The bullies tried to act casual, pretending like nothing had happened. "Nothing," one of them said, though the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. The girl took a step forward, standing tall even though her hands were still slightly shaking. "They were bothering me," she said simply. Her voice didn't waver this time. It was honest, clear. She didn't exaggerate or plead. She just stated the truth. The teacher's expression softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. "I see. You three," she said, pointing at the bullies. "Come with me to the office, now." The bullies' faces turned red, a mix of anger and embarrassment. They muttered complaints under their breath, but had no choice. They followed the teacher out, glancing back at her once or twice, but the weight of authority and their own shame kept them in line. As the door closed behind them, the girl finally let herself breathe. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as relief washed over her, the fear that had been gripping her all day. The tension that had made every heartbeat feel like a drum began to ebb. She realized she had survived. She had faced the bullies, used her wits, and waited for the right moment. And she had won in her own way. Her hands still trembled slightly as she wiped them on her jeans. She had been so focused on staying calm that she hadn't noticed how tense her muscles were. The adrenaline slowly faded, leaving her feeling tired but alive. She looked around the bathroom, taking in the quiet again, the faint smell of cleaning supplies and the soft echo of dripping water. For a moment, She allowed herself to feel proud. She had acted with courage even when she had been scared. She had found a way to protect herself without fighting, without giving the bullies the satisfaction of seeing her break. It was a small victory, but an important one. After a few minutes, the hallway outside was quiet. She peeked out of the bathroom door and saw the janitor still working, pushing the mop bucket slowly down the hall. Other students passed by, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. She realized that most people had no idea what went on behind closed doors. They didn't see the small everyday battles that some students had to fight just to feel safe. As she walked back to her next class, her backpack snug on her shoulders, she felt a small shift inside her. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely. She knew the bullies would be back and other challenges would come, but for the first time in a long while she felt like she had a sense of control. She had learned that courage didn't mean never being scared. It meant acting even when fear was present. Later that day in art class, she sat quietly at her desk sketching again. Her pencil moved across the paper, capturing shapes, lines, and ideas. But this time there was something different in her expression. A small spark of confidence, a reminder that she had faced something terrifying and come out on the other side. Her hands still shook slightly from the adrenaline, but she smiled softly to herself. Her classmates noticed a difference too. A few glanced at her with curiosity, others with quiet admiration. Some whispered to each other, and though she didn't hear the words clearly, she felt the shift. People had seen her strength, even if only in small glimpses. And that mattered. After school, she walked home slowly, taking the long route through the park. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. She felt the warmth on her face, the gentle breeze through her hair. It was peaceful, almost like the world had paused for her for a moment. She thought about the bullies, about the fear, about the choices she had made. She realized that while she couldn't control their actions, she could control how she responded, and that made all the difference. She had survived, and she had learned something valuable about herself. That evening, she sat at her desk at home, flipping through her sketchbook. The drawings felt alive in a new way, as if they carried the memory of the day's struggle and triumph. She smiled, tracing the lines with her fingers. Art had always been her refuge, but now it also felt like a reminder of her strength, a place where she could process, reflect, and grow. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The bullies might try again. School might feel overwhelming at times. But she had learned that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about facing what scared her, even when it felt impossible, and finding a way through. And she knew deep down that she could. When she opened her locker, she found a small piece of paper tucked inside. It wasn't a note from the bullies. It was from another student she had seen around school, someone who usually kept to themselves. The note was simple, handwritten in careful letters. "You were brave yesterday. Don't let anyone scare you." She felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she realized that someone had noticed her struggle and wanted to offer support. In class, the atmosphere was calmer than usual. Teachers seemed more alert, and some students who had once ignored her began to glance her way with small smiles. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention, but to her it felt huge. She had always felt invisible, like her presence didn't matter, but yesterday had changed that. At least for a few people, she mattered. During lunch, she found her usual corner table in the cafeteria and sat down with her sketchbook. She began drawing quietly, capturing the details of the cafeteria, the way sunlight streamed through the windows, the way students moved in clusters, the expressions on their faces. Her mind, which had been, all of fear and tension for so long, felt a little lighter. Then she heard a soft voice beside her. "Mind if I sit here?" She looked up and saw one of the students from her art class. He had always seemed friendly, but not the type to seek out conversations with anyone new. She hesitated for a moment, unsure, but then nodded. "Sure." He smiled and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "I just wanted to say, what happened yesterday, I saw it. You handled them really well." Her chest tightened. Compliments didn't come easily to her, especially after so many days of being treated like she didn't matter. She nodded slowly, feeling a little embarrassed. "Thanks," she said softly. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I just thought you should know someone noticed." They didn't talk much after that, but the simple act of sitting together felt significant. She realized that even small gestures could make a difference, even when the world seemed stacked against you. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes, but she noticed other small changes. The bullies, who had seemed so confident before, were quieter. They lingered in corners, avoiding her gaze, as if yesterday's events had shaken them more than they were willing to admit. She didn't feel the same fear she usually did. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction, a sense that she had reclaimed some control. After school, she decided to take a longer route home, walking through a quieter part of the neighborhood park. The air was cool and the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the path. She felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Facing fear so directly yesterday had taken a lot out of her, but it had also given her something new, confidence she hadn't known she could have. She thought about her art, about the way she could capture the world on paper. Maybe it wasn't just an escape anymore. Maybe it could be a way to express what she had been feeling, a way to process the tension and fear she had lived with for so long. She flipped through her sketchbook, stopping on drawings she had done of the school, the hallways, the people around her. They looked different now, more alive, more meaningful. Over the next few days, the change in her school life became more apparent. Teachers seemed more aware of what had happened and kept a closer eye on the bullies. She noticed that some students who had once joined in on teasing or ignored the bullying were now more careful. They didn't approach her directly, and some even gave small smiles or nods of acknowledgement when she passed by. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. She also noticed that her own behavior had changed. She walked with her head a little higher, held her shoulders a little straighter, and spoke up more in class when she had something to say. The fear was still there, of course, but it no longer controlled her. She realized that courage wasn't about never feeling scared. It was about acting despite the fear. One afternoon during art class, she found herself talking quietly with a small group of classmates. They shared sketches, gave each other tips, and laughed together. It was the first time she felt like she truly belonged in a group, even if it was small. She didn't realize how much she had missed that sense of connection until now. At the same time, the bullies' behavior had begun to change in noticeable ways. They were still there, still around, but they no longer had the same energy of intimidation. They would mutter under their breath, shoot quick glances, but they didn't corner her or make her feel trapped. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to remind her that the balance of power had started to tilt. One day, during a class discussion, a student asked a question that many others ignored. Without thinking, she raised her hand and gave an answer. Her voice was calm, clear, and confident. A few students glanced at her in surprise, and even the teacher nodded approvingly. She felt a small thrill of pride. It wasn't just about speaking. It was about being seen, about asserting her presence in a space where she had once felt invisible. Later that week, she found another note in her locker. This one was longer, written carefully in neat handwriting. It said, "You are stronger than you know. Keep standing up for yourself. Some people notice even if they don't say it." She smiled as she read it, feeling warmth spread through her chest. It was incredible how small gestures could make such a big difference. Her relationship with the ally who had intervened, the teacher, also grew subtly. The teacher would check in quietly, offer a kind word in passing, or give her encouragement during class. She felt supported, not because anyone was doing her work for her, but because someone cared enough to notice and stand up for what was right. By the end of the week, she realized that the school, while not perfect, had started to feel more manageable. She had a few friends. The bullies were less aggressive, and she felt capable of facing challenges without being paralyzed by fear. Each day wasn't perfect, but it was better than the day before. She had learned that small victories could add up to significant change over time. One afternoon after school, she walked home with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. She stopped at the park, as she often did, and sat on a bench watching the sunlight filter through the trees. She opened her sketchbook and began drawing again, capturing the scene around her. The way the light hit the leaves, the children playing nearby, the quiet movement of the wind. But now there was something new in her sketches, a sense of hope, a sense of strength. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning to thrive. She thought about the bullies, the fear, and the moments that had once made her feel powerless. She realized that while she couldn't control their actions, she could control her response. She could choose courage. She could choose to act thoughtfully and protect herself. And she could choose to notice the small signs of support around her, the people who had her back even if silently. That evening, she shared some of her sketches with her friend from the cafeteria. They smiled and praised her work, noticing details she had poured into every line. It felt good to share a piece of herself, to connect through creativity. She realized that while school had been a place of fear and struggle, it could also be a place of growth, discovery, and connection. By the weekend, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. The events of the bathroom, the fear, and the confrontation with the bullies had left their mark, but they had also given her something new: confidence in her own strength, faith in the kindness of others, and a quiet determination to stand up for herself when needed. She knew challenges would come again, but she also knew that she had the tools to face them. Courage, calm thinking, and the support of those who cared were more powerful than she had ever realized. And as she looked out at the setting sun, her sketchbook open on her lap, she felt a small smile grow on her face. She had survived fear, and she was beginning to understand that she could grow stronger from it. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not just noticed, but truly seen. Her courage, her struggle, and her presence mattered. And that realization, small but powerful, changed everything for her. The days that followed brought a new rhythm to her school life. The fear that had once gripped her at every hallway corner had begun to loosen its hold. It wasn't gone completely. She knew better than to believe that. But it no longer defined her every move. Instead, she felt a quiet confidence growing inside her, a sense that she could face what came her way without being crushed by it. The bullies were still present, as they always were, but something had shifted. Teachers and staff were more alert, students were paying attention, and even the small changes in their behavior signaled that yesterday's events had consequences. They no longer had the same freedom to corner her, to mock her with impunity. Even their glances carried a hint of caution. She noticed it and felt a subtle satisfaction, though she didn't let herself gloat. She had no desire for revenge. She simply wanted to feel safe. It was during one of her classes that she first realized just how much had changed. The teacher, who had intervened in the bathroom, paused at her desk to ask if she was okay. The concern in her eyes was genuine, not perfunctory. She nodded quietly, grateful for the check-in. She didn't have to explain everything. Sometimes just being seen was enough. A few students, the ones who had whispered and giggled at her before, now treated her differently. They offered small smiles or nodded politely in the hallway. She didn't expect friendships overnight, but these gestures reminded her that not everyone was indifferent, and some people noticed courage when it happened. By lunchtime, she had begun to sit with her small circle of friends more consistently. The group was quiet but supportive. They shared sketches, exchanged stories about homework, and discussed classes. There was laughter now, and she realized that for the first time in a long while, she looked forward to lunchtime. She didn't feel like she had to hide or shrink herself. One afternoon, the school principal called her to the office. Her stomach tightened as she walked down the hall, clutching her backpack. She wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe a conversation about the bathroom incident, or perhaps something else entirely. She had no reason to feel nervous yet. The old habits of caution lingered. The principal greeted her warmly and motioned for her to sit. "I wanted to talk to you about the situation with the students in the bathroom," he began. "We take these matters seriously, and I want you to know that we're making sure it doesn't happen again. The students involved have been disciplined appropriately." Her chest felt lighter. The word appropriately carried weight. She had been afraid that reporting what happened would either be ignored or make things worse. But now she realized that the school was taking responsibility. That realization alone brought a sense of justice she hadn't expected. "They will have meetings with their parents, and consequences have been set," the principal continued. "I also want you to know that if anything ever happens again, you can come straight to any staff member. You don't have to face it alone." She nodded, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude. It wasn't just about the punishment for the bullies. It was about knowing that someone believed in her, that her safety mattered, and that she had allies she could trust. As she left the office, she felt lighter, almost buoyant. For the first time in months, she walked down the hallways without the constant pressure of fear pressing on her. The bullies were still there, but the balance of power had shifted. They no longer had free rein over her life at school. In the following weeks, she noticed even more subtle changes. The small gestures of kindness from classmates grew. Students who had once ignored her now offered help with assignments or included her in conversations. She realized that courage could ripple outward, inspiring small acts of support from others. During one art class, the teacher asked if she could help lead a small group activity. She hesitated at first, unused to being in a position of authority, but the encouragement from her teacher gave her the confidence to try. As she guided her classmates, explaining techniques and sharing tips, she felt a sense of pride she hadn't known she could experience in school. Her voice carried authority, calm and clear, and she realized that people listened. Meanwhile, the bullies began to lose some of their influence. Without the ability to intimidate her, they started to fade into the background. Some of their friends who had previously joined in the harassment distanced themselves. They didn't confront her directly, but they no longer laughed at her or tried to provoke her in hallways. Slowly, the sense of threat that had been constant for so long began to fade. One day she noticed a small group of younger students huddled near the lockers looking anxious. Their expressions reminded her of herself weeks ago, nervous, unsure, and cornered by fear. She felt a surge of empathy. Without thinking, she approached them quietly and asked if they were okay. The students looked up, startled, but she smiled gently. "It's all right," she said softly. "If you need help, just let someone know. You don't have to face it alone." The younger students nodded, relief evident in their eyes. It was a small act, but it reminded her of how far she had come. She had faced fear herself, had stood up for herself, and now she could offer the same support to others. The realization brought a warmth to her chest, a quiet sense of purpose. Her growing confidence spilled over into her personal life as well. She began speaking up more in class discussions, sharing her ideas and participating in group projects. Her teachers noticed the change, often praising her initiative and encouraging her to take on new challenges. For the first time, she felt like her voice mattered, like she could shape her own path instead of being defined by fear. Even the bullies began to behave differently in subtle ways. One of them, the leader, who had once thrived on intimidation, now avoided confrontations. He would glance at her occasionally, perhaps recognizing the shift in her demeanor, but he no longer approached her with malice. It wasn't that he had changed entirely. People rarely did overnight, but the balance had shifted, and she no longer felt powerless. At home, she continued to pour her experiences into her art. Her sketchbook became a journal of sorts, capturing not only scenes and objects, but emotions and moments of growth. The lines on the paper reflected her journey, the fear, the courage, the small victories, and the connections she had made. Each sketch felt like a step forward, a tangible reminder of her resilience. One afternoon, her friend from the cafeteria, the one who had first complimented her bravery, stopped by after school. They walked through the park together, talking quietly about classes, hobbies, and dreams. For the first time in a long while, she felt the simplicity of friendship without fear lurking in the background. The world didn't feel as isolating anymore. She also started noticing the ripple effects of her courage in ways she hadn't anticipated. Other students who had been silent or hesitant began standing up for themselves in small ways. They didn't always confront the bullies directly, but they refused to participate in cruelty or intimidation. The culture in her school was shifting, slowly but noticeably. By the end of the month, she had begun mentoring a few younger students who were struggling with similar fears. She shared her experiences carefully, emphasizing the importance of staying calm, seeking help, and finding allies. She offered strategies she had learned through her own trials, and her words carried weight because they were born of real experience. It wasn't always easy. Some days, old anxieties crept in, and she had to remind herself of the lessons she had learned. Courage was not a constant state. It was something she had to practice moment by moment. But she felt ready for the challenge. Each small victory strengthened her resolve, reinforcing the belief that she could face adversity and emerge stronger. Her art also took on new meaning. She began sharing her work in school exhibitions, displaying drawings that reflected not just creativity, but her journey through fear and courage. Classmates and teachers alike admired her work, commenting on the emotion and depth she captured. She realized that her voice could reach others not just through words, but through her creations. Even the bullies, though still present in some classes, had begun to fade from the center of her world. Their power to intimidate had diminished, and she no longer let their presence dictate her actions. She had learned that true strength didn't come from fighting them directly, but from holding her ground, seeking support and refusing to be defined by fear. One Friday afternoon, she walked home through the park, sketchbook in hand, sunlight filtering through the trees. She paused on a bridge overlooking a small stream, taking a deep breath. The wind whispered through the leaves, and for the first time in a long time she felt a sense of peace. She had faced fear, navigated cruelty, and discovered a quiet strength within herself that no one could take away. She thought about the bullies, the moments of fear, and the support she had received from teachers, friends, and even strangers. Each experience had shaped her, teaching her resilience, courage, and the value of connection. She realized that while fear would always exist in some form, it no longer controlled her. She had reclaimed her power. Looking out at the flowing water beneath the bridge, she felt a sense of clarity. Life would continue to bring challenges, but she knew she had the strength to meet them. Her journey was far from over, but she had already proven to herself that she could survive, grow, and even help others along the way. And in that moment, standing in the golden light of the late afternoon, she understood something vital. Courage, once discovered, could change everything. It could shift the balance of power, create allies, inspire others, and transform fear into action. She had discovered it in herself, and she knew she would carry it forward, wherever life took her next. By the time the school year was approaching its final months, she noticed how much had changed, not just in the school around her, but inside herself. The hallways that had once felt crowded and suffocating now seemed manageable. She walked with her head held higher, aware of her surroundings but not afraid. She had learned to read the subtle signs of trouble, but fear no longer dictated her every step. Her friendships had grown stronger. The small circle of supportive classmates had expanded slowly, one person at a time. Some students who had been shy or quiet now sought her out, asking questions or offering help with projects. She realized that by being brave, she had inspired others to find courage in their own ways. Small acts of kindness and support had multiplied around her, and she felt the quiet power of community. The bullies were still in school, but their influence had dwindled. Teachers and staff remained vigilant, and the consequences of their past actions had made them more cautious. The girl no longer felt trapped by their presence. Even when she saw them in the hall or in class, she felt calm and steady. Their power over her had diminished, not because she had forced it, but because she had refused to let fear control her, and because the school environment had shifted around her. One afternoon, she found herself walking past the lockers when she noticed a younger student being cornered by a group of peers. Her heart went tight for a moment, recognizing the fear in the student's eyes, the same fear she had once felt so often. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. "Hey," she said gently but firmly, standing between the student and the others. "It's okay. You don't have to deal with this alone." The bullies from before who had been nearby glanced over and smirked, but she didn't flinch. She stayed calm, keeping her voice steady. The younger student nodded and quietly walked with her toward a teacher who had just appeared around the corner. The bullies muttered, annoyed, but didn't pursue. In that moment, she realized something profound. She had grown not only stronger for herself, but also capable of protecting and guiding others. Her art continued to play a central role in her life. She had begun to submit her work for school exhibits and small local competitions. Each piece reflected her experiences: the fear, the courage, the struggle, and the victories. She used her art as a way to process emotions that were hard to put into words. When people admired her work, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, and she was sharing that growth with the world. Teachers began noticing her leadership skills in subtle ways. During group activities, she naturally took on the role of helping organize and guide others. She didn't dominate conversations or force her ideas on anyone. Instead, she listened carefully, encouraged participation, and gently helped her peers feel included. She discovered that leadership didn't mean being loud or aggressive. It meant offering support, sharing knowledge, and creating a safe space for others. Even in academic challenges, she began to show her growing confidence. She participated more actively in class, asked questions when she didn't understand something, and shared her ideas during discussions. Her voice carried weight, and her teachers responded with encouragement. For the first time, she felt like she had agency in her own learning. Her presence mattered, and she could influence the classroom in a positive way. One day, the school announced a mentorship program for younger students, pairing older students with those who needed guidance. She immediately signed up, thinking of the younger kids she had once seen being intimidated or left out. She wanted to be the kind of support that she had once needed, a steady presence, someone who could offer guidance without judgment or condescension. Her first mentee was a girl in 7th grade who had been struggling with confidence. At first, the girl was hesitant, unsure if anyone would really listen. But the older girl shared her experiences carefully, explaining how fear could be managed, how courage was built step by step, and how asking for help was not a weakness. Over the weeks, she watched the younger student grow, offering encouragement and celebrating small victories. The pride she felt was different from any recognition she had received for her own achievements. It was deeper, rooted in seeing someone else find strength. As the months passed, the school environment continued to improve. Students were more considerate, teachers more attentive, and bullying had diminished significantly. Not every student changed, of course, but the culture of fear that had once pervaded the hallways was replaced by a sense of awareness and mutual respect. Her small acts of courage, combined with the support she had received, had sparked subtle but meaningful change. Even her family noticed a difference. At home, she seemed calmer, more confident, and more willing to share her thoughts and feelings. They had always supported her, but now they saw the growth she had achieved on her own, the resilience she had developed through facing challenges. They encouraged her, praised her, and helped her see the value in the choices she had made. She also began to reflect on the way she had handled fear and adversity. She realized that courage was not something that appeared suddenly in a dramatic moment. It was built slowly, piece by piece, through small decisions, careful planning, and acts of perseverance. She had learned to observe, to think before reacting, and to act when the time was right. And that skill, she realized, could be carried through life beyond the school walls. One afternoon, as she walked home from school with her sketchbook tucked under her arm, she passed by a small playground. She saw a group of children playing together, laughing and chasing one another. She paused for a moment, remembering how trapped she had once felt in her own school hallways, how every step had been measured against fear. The contrast was striking. Now she felt free in a way she had never imagined. She sat on a bench and opened her sketchbook, drawing the scene before her. But her drawings had changed. They were no longer just about capturing what she saw. They reflected the journey she had taken, the lessons she had learned, and the strength she had discovered. She added careful strokes, shading, and depth, conveying emotion in every line. When she finished, she looked down at her work and felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was more than art. It was a record of her courage, a reminder of her growth, and a source of inspiration for herself and others. Back at school, she found her friends waiting in the art room. They exchanged sketches and offered feedback, sharing ideas and laughter. It was a simple scene, but it was filled with connection, trust, and mutual respect. She realized that the bonds she had formed were stronger than any fear or threat. They were built on understanding, shared experience, and the willingness to support one another. Even the bullies, though still present in some classes, had largely faded from her life. They no longer intimidated her, no longer dictated her actions or thoughts. She had learned that true power came not from aggression but from resilience, awareness, and the support of those who cared. She could navigate her school without letting anyone's cruelty define her. As the school year came to a close, the administration recognized her contributions to the mentorship program and her positive influence on school culture. She received a certificate of appreciation and a small award for her efforts in promoting kindness, courage, and inclusion. Standing in front of the audience, she felt a mixture of pride and humility. She hadn't acted for recognition, but it was satisfying to see that her efforts had been noticed and valued. After the ceremony, her friends congratulated her, and the younger students she had mentored gave her shy smiles and words of thanks. It was a moment of closure and celebration, a recognition that she had faced her fears, grown stronger, and helped others along the way. She realized that the journey wasn't just about surviving bullying. It was about learning to stand tall, support others, and create positive change in the world around her. Walking home that evening, she reflected on the months behind her. The fear, the confrontations, the moments of courage, they had all shaped her. She understood now that growth often comes from adversity, and that even small actions can have significant consequences. Every step she had taken, every choice she had made, had led her to this moment of empowerment and clarity. She sat on the steps of her porch, sketchbook open in her lap, and thought about the future. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but she knew she had the tools to face them: courage, resilience, and the support of friends, family, and allies. She understood that fear was not something to be eliminated, but something to be managed and used as a guide. And she felt ready, more ready than she had ever been to face whatever came next. Her journey had transformed her. She had learned to stand up for herself, help others, and navigate a world that could sometimes be cruel and unfair. She had discovered strength she didn't know she had, and in the process she had inspired change around her. The school that had once felt like a place of constant danger had become a space of possibility, growth, and connection. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, she closed her sketchbook and looked up at the horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time it felt exciting rather than frightening. She had faced fear and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to make a difference. And that knowledge, quiet but powerful, filled her with hope and determination. She stood, stretched, and walked inside, carrying her sketchbook and the lessons of her journey with her. She had learned that courage could change everything, not just for herself but for those around her. And as she prepared for the days ahead, she knew that she would continue to stand tall, face challenges head-on, and help others find their own strength along the way.